noise. You will be muted in your audio, but you're welcome to keep your video up if we all want to see all your shining, happy faces. So feel free to keep your video up, or if you'd like to take it off, that's totally fine too. This is an interactive presentation. We want to hear from you. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you should see a toolbar. There's a chat window. So bring that up. Feel free to ask a question at any point. I'm going to be moderating the chat box and Crystal will be presenting. So feel free to ask a question and we'll have questions answered during the presentation as well as the end. So feel free to hang around with us after the presentation is over. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal, and Crystal will be presenting today. Take it away, Crystal.
Thanks. So yep, my name's Crystal Wessel. I'm going to be presenting this today, and this is our first session. It's tree identification and tree hazards. So first of all, we just want to give a big thank you to all of our residents, our partners, all of you. I know some of you are probably attending a lot of Zoom sessions, so thank you for taking time to be on ours. We have had to postpone all of our plantings for this spring, but we are hoping that we're able to complete them in the fall. We're just making choices so that our staff and our volunteers can all stay safe. And so thank you for being here with us while we're trying to figure out what to do in these times. So, who are we? We were founded in 1998. We're a statewide organization. Our Urban Airshed Reforestation Program, which Meredith directs, was founded in 2002. That's based in Camden. And our Renaissance Trees program, which is my program, was founded in 2006, and that's Newark and North Jersey. These programs give free trees to residents in those cities. So we plant trees with volunteers, get the whole neighborhood involved. They're really fun. To date, we've planted over 7,000 trees in Camden and Gloucester and over 3,500 trees in Newark and North Jersey, and that's just with our volunteer programs. We also have our Green Streets crew, which we hire men under parole supervision to plant trees throughout the state. So this is a contract program where municipalities can hire the crew. They come out, they do the planting, and altogether, we have planted over 254,000 trees throughout the state over the past 22 years. So pretty cool. First of all, what is a tree? So how do we tell a tree from a shrub? And a general definition is they're woody plants that reach at least 10 feet tall. And when identifying trees, it's important to know each part of the tree because all the individual parts, like the bark and the leaves, are all going to tell you what kind of tree you're looking at. So a little basic tree biology first. We've got the roots. They're basically straws. So they absorb all the water and minerals from the soil. They can also store them for later on. And most importantly, they hold the tree into the ground and make sure that it doesn't fall over. The trunk of the tree holds it up and moves those nutrients from the roots to the rest of the tree, to the branches and the leaves. Branches help to move the food to the leaves and from the leaves to the rest of the tree. And then the leaves, they use sunlight to photosynthesize, so they turn that light energy into chemical energy and create more food for the tree. We also have flowers. This is how they reproduce. Every tree does have flowers, even if it's not a flowering ornamental tree. They just might be very small. The flowers contain pollen and little eggs. So then once they've been pollinated, the flower turns into a fruit. It could be a berry, maybe like an acorn, a samara. There's a picture in a couple slides with some different examples of fruits. Some basic terms, you might be familiar with some of these, you might not be. Deciduous tree loses its leaves in the fall. So this is most of our trees, any oaks or maples, anything that's not an evergreen, which is a tree that maintains its needles or foliage all year. So pines, spruces, firs. We have native species originally from this area. Non-native means that it was from a different area and brought to this area. And then we have invasive species, which outcompete local species, and they spread very rapidly. And we'll go into a little more detail on that in a couple slides. The crown of the tree is the head, so that's basically how it's shaped. So we have round trees, vase shapes, pyramidal, the natural form that the tree will take. And hardiness zone. We also have a map of this. This is the areas where a plant can be expected to grow based on the temperature extremes of that area. And it's generally based on the lowest annual temperature. So native versus non-native versus invasive. This is kind of a controversial topic sometimes, and it can be a little bit confusing. So native trees, this is the shadblow serviceberry. This is native to our area. It grows here naturally. It could grow out in the woods. You don't necessarily have to plant it. It does great here. Always a good option. We also plant okame cherries sometimes. They are non-native, but they are not invasive. So you can plant them. They're not going to spread like crazy. They're not going to outcompete other species. There is still a good option for planting in this area, even though they're not originally from this area. Then we have Bradford pears, which are everywhere in this state, and they are non-native and invasive. So they're pretty, but they spread like wildfire, and they will also crowd out other species and prevent the native species, like the serviceberry, from thriving in an area because they are completely uncontrolled. We do not plant non-native invasives or any invasives. This is the hardiness map that I had mentioned. So we're pretty much zones 6 and 7, depending on what part of New Jersey you're in. Up north, it's a little bit colder by the coast, and in like Camden, it's a little bit warmer. So when you're choosing a plant for your yard, you just want to make sure to check what its hardiness zone is. Check what hardiness zone you're in so that you can be sure that your tree is going to be able to tolerate the temperatures in your area. So let's get into a little bit of tree identification. Like I said earlier, all the different features of the trees are going to help you identify what tree you're looking at. It can be done with a dichotomous key. We use the trees of New Jersey usually. And then once you've been doing this for a while and you're becoming familiar with the trees that you're seeing all the time, a lot of them are really easy to identify, like a maple or an oak. A lot of you probably know just by seeing the leaves because you see them all the time. You know that's an oak tree. Where to get started? This is the guide I mentioned. There are a lot of different guides, so there are many that you can pick up. They're all pretty similar. They use the different characteristics of the tree to help narrow down what your tree might be. They're usually specific to zones and regions, so this one's for the Mid-Atlantic states. Just because if you had one for the whole country, there would be too many trees, too many options. That said, these are not completely exhaustive guides. So most of them will give you trees that are commonly found in an area, but if you see a tree and you just don't see it in the guide, it's not like it might not be in there. They just don't cover everything. Most guides will have a dichotomous key. They're all a little different, but generally follow the same questions. And we're going to go through some of these questions over the next few slides. So it'll ask you what type of leaves the tree has. Are the leaves simple or are they compound? And then you would answer the first question, or you'd say, are the leaves simple? Yes? Okay, well, we can go to question 3. And then you would do that for the whole guide until eventually it'll tell you, okay, go to page 40 to 41, and that's probably one of your trees. Leaf arrangement, there are 2 options, alternate and opposite. Alternate is when your leaves are arranged in a zigzag pattern, and opposite is when they are directly across from each other. So important to note, we want to look at the tree buds, or the buds at the base of the leaf. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a couple slides, but we want to look at where the buds are arranged, not necessarily the leaves. Most trees you're going to see are alternate, and there are only a few with opposite leaf arrangement, especially that are common around here. Those are maple, ash, dogwood, and horse chestnut. And you can remember that by mad horse. So if you see a tree and it has opposite leaf arrangement, it's almost definitely one of those trees if you're in this area. Now we have two different types of leaves. We have simple and compound. So a simple leaf is just one leaf with one margin going all the way around. It might have lobes or incisions, but they don't actually divide the leaf. There's a picture on the next slide. It'll be easier to understand. So a simple leaf, just one leaf. A compound leaf is divided into many different leaves called leaflets. And these leaflets don't have a bud at the base of them, which is how you can tell that it's a leaflet and not a full leaf. So it's a little easier to understand. Simple leaf, we've got one margin, that's what the edge of the leaf is called, one bud. Compound leaves, we've got one bud, but we've got several little leaflets, and there are no buds at the base of these leaflets. They can be arranged in a couple different ways, but the most important part, leaflets don't have buds. Some more examples. There are different types of compound leaves. Pinnately or palmately are the most common ones. And we have different types of simple leaves too. So this is the margin. When I said the edge of the leaf, entire means it's smooth. There are no indentations, there's no little teeth, it's just like a piece of paper. Singly toothed, little teeth, think like a serrated knife, so they're very small. They can be doubly toothed as well, also very small serrations. And then we have lobed. So toothed leaves are not lobed. It's a little bit hard to tell the difference at first until you become familiar with the different types of trees and leaves. But lobed is some deeper indentations like a trident or like a mitten for like maple leaves, for example. And then a leaf clasp is just where the leaf attaches to the branch. These are, again, some varieties of compound leaves. So for all these examples, this is a little tricky to get at first. This whole thing is one leaf. So there's a bud right here. There are no buds on these little leaflets. Again, here, the bud is here. So this entire leaf, this entire thing is one leaf, which is a little bit wild sometimes. And we have lobed versus unlobed. Lobed leaves are pretty much always simple. They have the deep indentations, so an oak tree, a maple tree, like the Canada flag, those are lobes, they're deep indentations. And then unlobed leaves have a single continuous edge. And again, serrated are not lobes. We talked about seeds and fruits a little bit earlier. There are a lot of different types of fruits and seeds that your tree can have. These are just some of the most common examples. We've got samaras on maples, and we also have a different type of samara on an elm tree. Acorns are a fruit or nut. We can have berries, drupes, even like an apple or a cherry, that's a fruit. We have pods, like on redbud trees, pine cones. These are just some of the examples. And guides are going to ask you, most likely, are there any nuts or seeds or any sort of identifying feature present? Because if you see an acorn, you know that you are looking at some sort of oak. So they can be a really big clue. Now in the wintertime, we need to look at things besides the leaves. It's definitely harder, but bark can be a great identifying feature, especially for certain species which have a very specific type of bark. The problem is that bark can be much different depending on how old the tree is. So a lot of times a young tree and an old tree have completely different types of bark. You wouldn't even be able to tell it's the same tree by looking at it. So it is important to know what type of bark the tree has at different stages in its life. And they can also look a little bit different depending on what area of the world you're in. So it's not foolproof, but it is a good method. Some examples of bark, we've got smooth bark on like a beech tree. Lenticels, they're these little horizontal lines. You might see them on cherries a lot. Peeling strips on like a birch, paper birch. Vertical cracks, scales, which are common in like pine trees, evergreens. Plates, which are mostly like very large scales. Vertical strips, they're very common in maples. Intersecting ridges, regular ridges, or very straight, deep, uninterrupted ridges. These are not all of the types of bark. These are just some examples. So identifying your tree. We're going to practice a little bit here. So when you walk up to your tree, you'll need to know what kind of leaves it has. So broad-leaved, these are pretty much all your deciduous trees, or needle-like, so like spruce trees, fir trees, most of your evergreens, and then scale-like, which is only a very select few trees. Junipers have leaves like this, but most of your trees are going to be broad-leaved. So when you go up to your tree, the questions you're gonna have to answer: are the leaves simple or are they compound? What's your leaf arrangement, alternate or opposite? Are they lobed? Are they unlobed? And are there any identifying fruits, flowers, or nuts? So we're gonna practice a little bit. Tree number 1. So you can either guess in the chat box if you think you know what it is, or you can just type your answers to these questions if you're not sure, or if you just want to practice identifying these features. So when we look at this tree, is it simple or compound leaves? Does it have an alternate or opposite arrangement? Are there lobes? Are there no lobes? And are there any identifying fruits, nuts, or seeds? So feel free to make your guesses, and Meredith will let me know when we've got some good answers.
I've already seen, let's see, Bill, Jackie, Richard, Barbara, they all answered good answers. So we'll see if anyone else. Kaplan has a correct answer. Bill mentioned simple leaves, that's good. Opposite, correct. Yep, people are noting the arrangement, very good. I think anybody else want to answer or make their best guess? Yep. Very good. Okay, so yes, we got a lot of answers, right, and they're all correct. And they're all noting the different clues too. So good job, everybody.
So if you said red maple, awesome job. This is our Canadian flag leaf. So pretty easily identifiable. It's simple leaves. It has an opposite arrangement, so you can remember your mad horse. That's the M, maple. They do have that very distinct lobed leaf shape, like a little trident, usually 3 little lobes. And then they have those samaras, these little whirligigs that are everywhere outside right now if you've taken a walk. Fun fact, they are actually overplanted in New Jersey. So we will plant them occasionally, but we really try and plant other species of maples if we can, just because they're already everywhere and we do want to focus on diversity. So tree number 2. Are these leaves simple, compound, alternate or opposite, lobed or unlobed? That one might be a little tricky. And do you see any flowers or seeds? So go ahead and make your guesses.
Okay, people are noting the leaf arrangement. We already have a good correct answer from Susan. Mark? Yep, we've got some good answers. Yeah, Bill is noting the alternate arrangement and the distinctive seeds. So is Janine. Leaves. Got a couple correct answers. We give everybody another minute. Very good, Sarah. Okay. Okay, Crystal, we got some correct answers. So
Okay.
if you can let everybody know.
So we are looking at an eastern redbud here. Leaves are simple. They are alternate. These are actually unlobed. I don't know if we had some lobed guesses. This one can be a little bit tricky because it is like a heart-shaped leaf, and sometimes people might think, you know, those hearts are a lobe, but they're not. And it's actually pretty easy to identify this tree once you know redbud, heart-shaped leaves. It's pretty much one of the only trees in this area that has them. So if you see a leaf, or if you see a tree with heart-shaped leaves, you're probably looking at a redbud. The flowers are also very identifying, bright pink usually. And they have these long bean-like seed pods. So one more. Okay, this one is a little bit tricky. Are they simple or compound, lobed or unlobed, and are there any fruits, nuts, or seeds? I'll give you a hint for this one because it's a little hard to tell, but they have an alternate arrangement.
Okay, I'm noting some people have noticed, Janine noticed compound leaves, so did Carl. Good job. I see some seed pods. Sarah Jane has the correct answer for a tree. Give a few more minutes, let everybody else put in their, Jack, you got it too. Good job. A few more minutes. This is usually the trickiest tree to identify, but I'm seeing people are not fooled, so good job.
All right, are we ready?
Yes, I think we're ready.
Okay. So this is a honey locust. They're pretty common in New Jersey. They're very hardy trees, so they're planted a lot. They are pinnately or bipinnately compound. So I'll go back a slide. So this whole thing is a single leaf. So that seems a little crazy, but if we were looking closer, there's a bud right here, and there is not a single bud on any of these leaflets. They're unlobed, they're alternates, and in the fall they have, or in the spring, they have these like yellow flowers, these very large seed pods. So pretty easy once you learn how to recognize them, but those compound leaves can be tricky. All right, so when we inspect a tree looking for clues to identify trees, we can also take a look and see if there are any problems with the trees, and we can judge how well our tree is doing and make sure it's doing healthy. So these two trees are not doing great. So hazardous trees are really important to recognize because they can cause serious issues. People are often worried about trees falling on their homes, on their cars. They're defective. Defective trees and branches are the first to come down during storms. So there's a pretty small chance that a perfectly healthy tree is going to come down. But if your tree has issues, if it's got some dead branches, that's definitely something to be concerned about. 84% of storm damage could have been predicted or prevented if we just took a look at our trees and recognized that they weren't doing so well.
Hey, Crystal, we have a question from you from Paul.
Sure.
He says that he has a black walnut in a pot. Last fall, it looked like all the branches fell off. Is that because they were really big compound leaves?
I do not know if that would make all the branches fall off. It might, though. If it was a very young tree, then, and like it wasn't able to support the weight yet, but I am not sure. I'm not sure about that. I'm sorry. I hope it's doing okay, though. It might still be doing all right if it has some buds. It could come back. So let's look at hazardous trees. So both of these trees have some dead parts on them, but only one of them is considered a hazard tree. So legally, a hazardous tree has to have a valuable target within falling distance. So a hazardous tree in the middle, or a defected tree in the middle of the woods or in the middle of an open field is not really considered a hazard, because if it falls, it's very unlikely that anyone is going to be harmed. If you have a dying tree next to your house, or even if there was, say, a picnic table underneath this tree, legally that would be a hazardous tree. Those are the ones that we're really concerned about. So the best way to prevent hazardous trees is just to make sure they're planted and maintained properly throughout their lifetime. Some problems just can't be avoided. They happen even with the best planting and maintenance practices, but we always want to set our tree up for success. So proper planting and maintenance, they can help prevent root girdling, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, and make sure that your tree has a nice shape to it, which makes it easier to withstand high winds or ice. So assessing your tree, trees will fail generally when the load exceeds the strength of the wood. So if you've got a very weak trunk or very weak branches with leaves, or say some ice falls onto the branch and is weighing it down, and that branch is not strong enough to hold it up, that's when it's going to fail. Defects are visible signs that the trees may fail. Not all defected trees can be detected. Trees are very, very good at hiding their issues, which is a problem sometimes. And a lot of the defects are inside, so you're not going to see any outward signs that there's actually anything wrong with it. So inspecting your tree, seeing if anything's up, is a really important step in seeing if your tree is potentially a hazard tree. These are some types of defects. We're going to go through them all individually. Decayed wood, cracks in your tree, root issues, weak branches, cankers, a poor tree architecture or tree shape, and dead or topped trees. Decayed wood is wood that is rotting or missing. This greatly reduces the strength of the tree. If the trunk of your tree is decayed and rotted inside, it is really not going to be able to support the weight up top. Eventually that's going to fail. This is caused when there's a wound to the tree. So if it was maybe a lightning strike or got hit with a lawnmower and some pathogens were able to get in, and then fungi and bacteria are able to reproduce. So when you see mushrooms on the side of your tree, it's usually a bad sign. Any type of fungal body on your tree indicates that there's some sort of decay happening in there. The way that trees respond to wood decay, we like to say they seal, they don't heal. So a tree will never fully heal over its wound. It just kind of covers it. And it does something we call compartmentalization. So it creates a little barrier zone around the defected wood. So see, the injury was here, and then it's gonna kind of seal over it and try and prevent any of that decay from spreading to the rest of the tree. So it does try and keep the damage contained, but it's not flawless. Sometimes it's able to get out. Sometimes the decay is just too severe, but it does try. So cracks in your trees, there are two big kinds of cracks, vertical, horizontal. It's any area where the bark splits. Now you could have some little cracks that aren't really an issue. You could have larger cracks that are a big issue, but the main problem is that these cracks allow the bacteria and the fungus to get inside your tree.
We have a quick question for you,
Sure.
going back from Janine.
Mhm.
She asks, if you remove the tree fungus, can that preserve a tree's lifespan?
Not really. So the fungus is like a symptom. So the decay would still be there, and like mushrooms would probably come back even if you were to remove them. So it's not really like the mushrooms are causing the problem so much as they're indicating that there is a problem, if that makes sense.
We also have another question from Bill.
Mhm.
How would you seal the cracks, or is that not possible?
You can't really seal the cracks. I think like years ago, people used some sort of like sealant for like when they pruned or if there was a crack in their tree, but it doesn't really do much. So I think it's one of those things like you can use it if you want, but ultimately it doesn't really help all that much. So some root problems. So like I said earlier, the roots are what keep your tree in the ground. So if you've got problems with your roots, then that's definitely something to be worried about. They are critical in providing stability and nutrients. So they're taking up water and nutrients from the ground, giving it to the rest of the tree, making sure it's healthy. So if your roots are compromised, your tree is compromised. They can be caused by excavating, trenching, paving. So these people here, I mean, they're trying to to avoid harming the roots, but ultimately that's not going to be great for them. In compacting the soil, so in urban areas especially, people are either walking over where the roots are or we've paved over where the roots are, and the soil really isn't able to get much air, and that can be a big problem for the roots. So there are a lot of different symptoms of root issues. We could see some dieback in the crown of the tree. We could see confined roots, which is very common in sidewalk trees. And root girdling, which is when the roots wrap around the trunk of the tree because they don't really have anywhere to go, and they also haven't been broken up properly when they were planted. And fungal growth can also indicate an issue with the roots. If there's any decay or bacteria going on in the root section, you might see some fungus growing towards the bottom of the tree. So when we have issues with roots, we can have an issue with a lean. The lean is caused because the root system is unable to continue anchoring the tree. So we want to aim for 60 to 70% of the roots intact and healthy. That leads to a well-anchored tree. In root restricting locations like sidewalks, roots are very critical, and we need to make sure we have healthy roots because they already have less space to grow and thrive. So we really have to take good care of those trees. Now, a couple times I've mentioned girdly roots. So you might be wondering what that is. If you've ever been at a tree planting with us, we'll tell you in container trees, when we take the tree out of the container, we just hack away at it with a knife or a saw. And we're doing that to break up the roots because they've been in the container so long that they're just wrapping around the tree. And if we don't break them up, then they will continue wrapping around the tree even after it's in the ground, and ultimately they can end up wrapping around so badly it creates like a choke point in the tree, and they can just come down, detach from the roots. Pretty dangerous.
Hey, Crystal, we have a question from Lori.
Yes.
Is there anything that can be done to boost the health of trees with root trouble?
Like if they already have trouble, I guess.
I think so, yeah.
So if you have girdling roots, you can, there is like a method to like cut them away and prevent them from girdling any further. I wouldn't do it on your own. I would definitely like get a professional to help with that. I'm not totally sure about other root issues though, but we can look into it and get back to you after we finish this up. Do you know offhand, Meredith? Like,
The only thing I can think of is maybe staking the tree if you're noticing a lean, if it's possible. I mean, if it's the big
for
trees,
young trees,
like,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, if they're young trees and they're leaning, I would stake them to help support the tree. If it's big, then that's probably not going to be possible.
It's hard. It's hard to. It's definitely hard to help the roots, especially to help them without disturbing it further.
Yeah. Lisa suggested also air spading by a professional. So I guess adding more air into the soil.
Yes. Yeah, that can be used when the soil the soil's really compacted, and that just helps the roots to be able to spread more and get more water and nutrients. Weak branches are more likely to fall. So when we look at a tree with 2 branches, we want to make sure that in between those branches, we see this little ridge called the branch. Oh, sure.
Sorry, Crystal, I have one more question for you. Apologies. Sure. We have a question from Giovanni. How do you suggest we maintain 60 to 70% of sound roots to make sure the tree is well anchored in a 2-foot wide strip between the sidewalk and the street curb line? So, how would you suggest
that? That is hard. I mean, I definitely recommend planting smaller trees, just so that they do have less like to support, and less like extensive root systems than a big oak tree. That's only one of the many reasons you shouldn't plant a large tree in a little space like that. Trying to keep people off of that area so we can prevent compaction, which is tricky in a street environment. Maybe like a little gate around it, but street trees are hard. I'm not gonna lie about that.
2 feet's not a lot of room.
Yeah, 2 by 2, that's probably too small even for the smallest of trees. We our minimum is generally 4 by 4, and that's like the minimum amount that a tree would need to really do well. So weak branches, we want to see this branch bark ridge. If you see that, it indicates that you've got a strong branch union. So each of these branches is well developed to be able to hold itself. It's attached to the trunk of the tree very well. Now, when we don't see a branch bark ridge, this is called like included bark. It kind of looks like, this isn't what happened, but it almost looks like the trunk of the tree was just kind of like split apart a little bit, and you really don't see a good connection. Now, both of these branches are not very well connected to the trunk of the tree, and they're at a much higher risk of falling during a storm. Certain species do just naturally have not great branch structure. We also have issues with water sprouts or suckers. They're all the same thing, but they basically happen when the tree is stressed and it's trying to send up like signals. And so certain species like cherries get these a lot. But all of these suckers, if they're not pruned properly, they can end up growing into a full branch, and they are never joined properly. So they can definitely end up becoming a hazardous branch later on. Cankers are areas where the bark and cambium are dead, so no new wood is being added to it each year. There are a lot of different causes for this. It could be insects eating away at it. It could be caused by disease, getting struck by lightning. A big problem we see are mowers or weed whackers. That definitely does a lot of damage to the tree. Being hit by a vehicle, being like carved into by someone. Now, all of these allow that bacteria and fungi to get into the tree. So that's the biggest reason why it's an issue. They can lead to tree failure if they affect more than about 40% of the tree circumference. So it's not unusual to have like a small canker here and there, and that's nothing to really worry about too much. But if you've got a really big one, or you have them all over your tree, then that's definitely something to be concerned about, because that part of the tree is completely dead and it's not doing anything to help support the tree. And it could even be letting more bacteria into the tree.
We have a quick question from Janine. Are galls a type of canker?
They're like a growth. So like a canker is more like dead wood, and a gall is just like a not dead, like it's not dead. But it's usually galls don't really hurt the tree actually, so they're not a huge concern. They can also be insect nests, I learned.
Yes.
To wasps in particular. So, but usually they're not that big of a deal.
We also have another question from Lori, real quick, before you continue. When the main trunk of a mature tree is forked, do you ever recommend that the less dominant fork should be cut off? This was suggested to Lori recently, and she thought it was not really sure about that. So how do you feel about removing the smaller of the two forks?
Yeah, no, you can definitely do that. It depends how old your tree is, and how large each branch is. So as a general rule, when you're pruning, you don't want to take off more than 25% of the tree. So if this branch has been, it's an older tree, this branch has been left to run wild and it's huge, and taking that off is going to be more than 25% of the tree. You might be a little wary of that. For an older tree, I would hire a professional anyway. But if your tree is younger, then you can absolutely take off the less dominant tree or the less dominant branch and kind of train your tree to focus on the good branch.
And Lori adds that the branch is almost as large as the other one. So getting that one off is probably...
It's a little...
yeah, it's going to be tricky, but...
it's a little iffy. You could maybe take it off in like half one year, and then the next year come back and take the rest off. But keeping an eye on your tree as it's young is a really good way to make sure that that doesn't happen. So as soon as you start seeing that split, pick the trunk that's doing better and just take the other one off while it's still young. So poor tree architecture is a specific growth pattern that just indicates a weak tree structure. So over here, we've got a topped tree. That's not great. A leaning tree. Over here, it looks like this tree was topped, and then it sent up a bunch of suckers. So like I said, they send up suckers when the tree is stressed. So it basically was sending these up as little SOS signals, because this tree still wants to photosynthesize and it still wants to try. So it's doing so by sending up these suckers with some leaves. But ultimately, these are all not very well attached to the tree, and this tree is probably going to die. So why you shouldn't top a tree, aside from it just looking ugly, it's really, really bad for the tree. And you've probably seen this along roadsides. Utility companies a lot of times will top them. I've even seen in homes people top their trees. And you just cut it off without any regard for proper pruning. And it weakens the natural shape of the tree. So whenever you're pruning a tree, you want to make sure you're pruning it according to the way that the tree is supposed to grow. And no tree is supposed to grow like this. This is called a harp tree. Harp tree. So this probably doesn't have a very good branch union. We would have to look at it, closer. But then these vertical branches here are also not really well attached. And this branch could probably fall at any time or be prone to cracks. Those cracks could lead to more decay.
Krista, we have another question from Paul.
Sure.
He mentions that there's a lot of really aggressive pruning around his area where it looks like almost all the small branches are cut off. Does that sound like, what does that sound like to you?
Like just topping it.
Yeah.
So there's also topping is take off the top. Tipping is when you just take off the branches. It's really a terrible way to prune, and like a tree company should not be like, they should know better, and there's not really any reason to ever prune a tree that way. It's not good for the tree. It doesn't look good. And yet they do it. They do it in my area too. Like all of the trees in my neighborhood are topped and they're pretty much dead. They're still there, shooting up suckers.
We have a comment from Bill as well. The trees on his corner have also been topped, and is there a way to get the town to change them?
That
or to
would
not top the
depend
trees?
on the town. To get them to take the tree down or to just stop topping the trees. Both are tricky. Both are hard.
Let's see what Bill has to say. Both, but it looks like he'll take it up with the town. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I would definitely maybe reach out to like your town if you see that they're doing this. I feel like a lot of people who work for townships don't necessarily know about proper pruning, so they hire this company, they trust the company to do it correctly, and then they don't. So I think even just giving them a call and they know like, hey, this company is pruning these trees incorrectly and irresponsibly, at least to give them a heads up. But it definitely varies township to township, and you are not alone in that problem. Dead branches, they can fail at any time. So like we said earlier, the dead branches are the first ones to come down. A healthy branch is unlikely to come down. It's not impossible, but your damaged ones are definitely going to be the ones to look out for. They are structurally unsound. They could be completely hollow inside. So we went through a lot of issues that your tree could have. The trees you're going to want to look out for are ones that have a combination of defects. So one issue on its own maybe isn't something to worry about, but if you're seeing mushrooms, you notice some dieback on your tree, you see some cankers going on, then that's definitely a cause for concern. As a general rule, we want a tree with a shell thickness of 1 to 6. So that's the ratio between decay and sound wood. It is very hard for someone to tell what the ratio is on their own. But this is where professionals come in and call someone out, and they have ways of telling how your tree's doing inside. Improperly planted trees, so if they were planted with a lean from the start and it's too late to stake them and get them straightened out, that's definitely going to be an issue. If there are some really big cracks in the tree, greater than a 40-degree lean is a problem. If more than 40% of the tree is covered in cankers or it's dead. And then if 40% of roots are damaged in the critical root radius, which is the drip line of the tree, again, it's really hard to see what's going on with your roots. So that's where a professional would be necessary. So now let's move on to some pest examples. These are not all of the pests that are in this area, but these are some pretty common ones, some bad invasives. We're just going to go through them. The Asian longhorn beetle was brought to the USA, discovered in 1996 in wood pallets, most likely. It was invasive, and it was actually discovered by a very observant resident. So just another reason to take a look at your trees, be on the lookout for any weird looking bugs. It was discovered in 2002. They feed on healthy parts of the trees. It was a big problem because a lot of the trees that they're feeding on are very common around here. They're common street trees, they're common park trees, elms, maples, willows, London planes. They tunnel through trees and create tiny little exit holes smaller than a dime. The good news is that the last live beetle was spotted in 2006, and in 2013, we announced that it was officially eradicated. This is not to say that it can never come back. It came over on wood pallets before. It could come over again. It could be moved by firewood. So we do want to take best practices to try and minimize the spread of invasive species. But for now, we're good. Emerald ash borer is a huge issue currently. It was brought to the USA, discovered in 2002. Again, wood crates. These things bring a lot of invasive species. The larvae feed on the inner conductive tissues of ash trees. So if you ever are able to peel back the bark of an ash tree, you probably would be able to do it if it's come off. You'll see these little snake-like channels underneath there. That's the emerald ash borer going through and feeding on the tree. And they form little D-shaped exit holes. So that's another identifying feature. Woodpeckers, if you see a lot of woodpeckers on your tree, it could indicate that there's emerald ash borer living in there. The problem is that by the time you see the woodpeckers and you notice the holes, it's probably already infested. So it's spread by moving logs and trees. First found here in May 2014, and it is spreading. There are little to no initial signs. So like I said, you might see holes, you might see woodpeckers. Some of your leaves might be browning a little bit. The bad news is that they kill pretty much every tree that they infect. So right now, the recommendation is just to take a preventative approach. If you have ash trees, remove them before EAB can get to them. Because if they get there, and they will eventually, they're going to kill the tree and create a hazardous tree. So unfortunately, I know it's not fun to hear, but if you have ash trees, you should probably take them down because it's a matter of when, not if.
Krista, we have a question from Sarah Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Will woodpeckers actively feed on EAB? Do they help at all with eradication?
They do feed on them, for sure, but they don't really feed enough to like eradicate it. So like by the time the woodpeckers and you see like all the woodpeckers, there's probably hundreds or thousands of beetles in that tree already. So they can help a little bit, but there's like no evidence that they can actually get rid of the beetles once they're there. Sadly. Here's just an example of a Toledo street before and after EAB. 2006, bunch of healthy ash trees. Just 3 years later, they are all dead. And this is another reason we try and plant a wide variety of species. So if we're doing a street tree planting, we'd want to plant at least 2 different species so that if a disease or a pest shows up and it infects one specific species, at least we'll have another species there so you don't end up with an entire street of dead trees. So confirmed activity, it is not in Camden yet. It is in Cherry Hill. It's in my neighborhood. It's close to Newark. It's not in Newark yet, but the western part of New Jersey, it's there and it's coming. There's kind of no way to avoid it. So we want to take some best practices to prevent pests. Don't move firewood. I know that bonfires are great. Try and use wood that is on your own property or that you've bought from a source that you know that there's no pests on it. They can be living in old logs, so don't go into the woods 10 miles from your house, pick up some sticks and then bring it back to your home because you might be bringing back a pest. Plant diverse trees. So like we said, we want a variety of trees so that if something affects one species, at least you have some others to fall back on. And plant hardy trees. So look at your hardiness zone. The better a tree is doing, the less susceptible it's going to be to pests and diseases. So we always want to make sure that we're planting trees that are going to do well in this area. You've probably seen this bumper sticker, don't move firewood, it bugs me. Spotted lanternfly is a really hot pest right now. You might have seen or heard about it. It's recently appeared in New Jersey just over the past couple years, and it's going to cause some problems. It damages crops by eating plant stems and excreting waste that we call honeydew. And this honeydew attracts like wasps and stinging insects, which, I mean, the wasps and stinging insects aren't bad for the tree, but they're not fun. But the dew can lead to sooty mold, which can harm the tree and make the crops unmarketable. Also, you know, insects drilling holes in the tree is never good. That's opening it up to decay. If you see one, so right now they're in this stage. This is an egg mass. They will literally lay their eggs on like any surface outside. And they're kind of hard to see, especially against a tree. If you see one, scrape it off, put it in a bag with alcohol or hand sanitizer, and kill it. And if you see one, report it. There's the Spotted Lanternfly hotline, which I put right here. You can give that a call if you see one. Let them know where you saw it. They're just keeping track of where it is and trying to manage it as best they can. So it does affect a lot of crops. Apple, plum, cherries, peach, grapes, and hops. So this affects your beer. It affects your wine. I know that those are some crops that people care about a lot, especially right now. So we have to be on the lookout. And it does affect regular trees too. Pines, beeches, sycamores, dogwoods, maples, oaks. It is a non-discriminating bug. It will feed on almost anything. Its favorite tree is the, well, we think that there's a connection between the spotted lanternfly and ailanthus, the tree of heaven. It seems to be like a host for these bugs. So if you are able to take them down, do so. They're invasive anyway. They are hard to remove. So that's not great. But if you are able to remove one and ensure the other ones don't pop up in its place, take them down. This is just the life cycle. So like I said, right now we are in egg mass stage. We are just getting into the first instar stage. So they're going to start hatching and you'll start seeing these little bugs. By about July to September, you'll see the fully formed moths. If you see these at any stage in their life, kill them. No, they're very pretty, they're very cool to look at, but we need to kill these bugs. This is a map of where they are currently at, but I believe this whole area is in quarantine. So a different kind of quarantine. So if you are traveling in or out of these counties, transporting trees or outdoor furniture, or just driving between them, then you're supposed to be checking to make sure that you're not accidentally bringing any egg masses or bugs with you. Right, so if you see any of these issues on your tree, contact an expert. So we gave you some ways to identify how your tree's doing, to see if it's doing healthy, but ultimately you want to call a professional if you're seeing some of these issues, because they will be able to come out, take a look at your tree, make some recommendations, let you know if it's healthy. Make sure that you're calling someone reliable, not someone who's going to come out and top your tree. So you can find an arborist or a licensed tree expert going to this website. We've got the NJ Board of Tree Experts, and they will be able to help you out with your tree. A lot of times they'll come out for free to give you a quote and assess your tree, just to let you know how it's doing. Right, so by doing inspections regularly, By taking a proactive approach, we can help to manage the risk of failure in our trees. No one wants to see a tree come down on their house, so we do want to constantly be watching for any signs of decay or indications that it might be a potentially hazardous tree, and together we can help create a healthy forest. So thank you for attending. We do have more information on our site. Meredith, can you see the site? If you want to go for any more information, we have programs. We have some blog posts. I just did one about calorie pairs, spotted lanternflies, if you want to read more about them. And our resources and education page is a good place. We have some common tree issues, best practices. And if you want to apply for a tree, if you live in Camden or Gloucester City, you can apply for our Urban Airshed Reforestation Program. For our Renaissance Trees program, if you're in Newark or Trenton, apply for that. And then any other municipality, if you have a great project and you just need some funding for it, we can help you look for funding. So fill out our shovel-ready project application. Any questions, also, you can reach out to me or Meredith for questions about our programs, and about trees, about the webinar, and I believe that's all I have for you. So if you do want CEU credits, please enter your name and municipality in the chat box, either as a regular method, or you can private message me and Meredith, and we'll put you on the list and make sure you get credit for being here today. So.
Hey, Crystal, we had a couple questions that I held till the end. So let me just real quick scroll. We had one from Betty. She mentions that her red oak was producing less leaves this year, that she was seeing it more in the crown, but she didn't see any of the defects that we mentioned. What would you recommend?
It's not necessarily like terrible. If you don't see any other problems, it could be a bug maybe that you just haven't noticed yet, or it just had a rough winter sometimes. But if you're not really seeing any other issues, and it's just dieback for 1 year and the dieback isn't really getting worse, then I wouldn't be worried about it. But like I said, those tree experts, you can call them and they will come out for you and let you know how it's doing. It's usually easiest to tell in person.
We had a question from Lori. She asked for any suggestions on reaching out to her DPW to just further discuss the issue of top trees. I mentioned to reach out to her environmental commission or shade tree board, or just find their information directly. But do you have any additional recommendations?
Yeah, definitely look to see if there's any sort of environmental group. Maybe the Parks Department might have some contacts. I know that I have a hard time getting in touch with DPW in any city, but parks are usually a little bit more responsive, or even like your mayor or like council people, because they do have the connections to be able to reach out to those workers and make that kind of stuff happen. So.
Last but not least, I have a question from Lan Jen to comment on the status of the southern pine bark beetle in New Jersey.
Wait, what was that again?
It was the asking about the status of the southern pine bark beetle. If you have any
I do not know offhand about the southern pine. I've heard a little bit about it, but I don't know too much about it at the moment. But we can definitely look into it, and we're going to send like a follow-up email tomorrow, and I can give you more info. Sorry, I don't have one offhand.
We can also check out the, Lisa mentioned the state website for any information on the beetle.
Good thinking.
And someone asked about CEUs. We're going to send them to the state. So we're collecting everyone's name. So please put your name in the chat box. We're going to send that to the state, and then your municipality will be counted. But you probably won't get any direct information unless you want to reach out, or unless you want that to be counted. In that case, I would include your email too.
If anyone wants to like turn on your mic and ask any questions out loud, please feel free. The program for applying for funding for trees. So if you're in Camden, it's the, let me go to that page actually. Can you see the website?
Yes.
If you're outside of Newark or Camden, we have our shovel ready project application. So this is good for like municipalities that maybe want to do park planting, but you just don't have the money for it. We don't have the money right now, but we can apply for funding and help you out with it. So yep, if you want to do that, shovel ready project application. Yep, here's more info. And feel free to email like myself or Meredith if you have any more questions about that. All I have, but me and Meredith will be hanging out here for a while until everyone's gone. So I hope that you've all signed up for next week. If you're interested, we'll be talking about environmental benefits of trees. So I hope to see everyone there.
We'll see you next week.
Oh, GN has a comment about BBC World News posted about which trees improve air quality. I think I heard about that study a couple weeks ago. So very interesting.
Thanks everyone for the great questions as well. That's an awesome question.
Yeah, I'm sorry for some things I couldn't answer off the top of my head, but we can definitely try and answer them in our follow-up email to you. And obviously, if you have questions about trees at any time, we are always here. Oh, and yes, I will be sending out the PowerPoint slides, and we will also be posting the whole presentation on our site within a couple of days. So it'll be available for you to view whenever if you want to view it again.